Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Well, welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And today we have another incredible guest. She's living over in Spain right now, but this is also a historical moment for me and thus Hannah. We are live streaming the podcast for the first time on Facebook, which is exciting for me and hopefully everybody who gets to see it. And then we'll do a portion here. And then to get the rest of the podcast, you will have to go over to the actual podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, anywhere there to listen to it. But let me introduce our guest. I'm super excited to hear more about what you do on a professional basis. And then I think it'll really add a lot of value into helping us identify who we are and thus what our legacy could be. So Hannah's a creator of integrative healing and multimodality and dimensional approach to self-healing and self-mastery. So she runs a school for this and she helps people have a holistic transformation. These healing practices are a large part of Hannah's life work and the essence of all her teaching. So when we're trying to create a legacy, something that's meaningful and trying to live in a way that we're excited about and that other people are excited about and share that with the world, that's a lot of identifying who we are and who we can share with the world. And so go ahead and share, Hannah, a bit of your past, where you came from. How did you discover this as one of your gifts and your skills? And why are you bringing it to the world the way that you do?
So that final question is very interesting. Why do you bring it to the world? And I think that when we discover that the world is lacking something that is actually very necessary, we can choose to complain about it or we can choose to do something about it. And so that's the essence of my story. So like you said, I founded a system called integrative healing. It's a multiple modality and multiple dimensional approach to healing. What that means is that I combine various viewpoints, dimensions, modalities of healing into one space to, in my opinion, work as a unified system that is far, I don't want to use the word superior because I don't believe in superior, inferior, but far more effective, right? When we have all of these modalities together. So it's unsurprising that I discovered this, created this, because I wasn't doing that great, you know? Like everyone that has a story of origins, it very often starts with like things weren't going that great. You know, I was 19. And I always start from this point because it's the most significant point. I'm 19 years old. I'm diagnosed with mental health, conditions. So an eating disorder, severe depression and social anxiety. I was fearful, to go out of my house, to be in big groups of people. And in the same 3 weeks, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. So the 7 years that followed looked like my healing and her dying. And it was in her dying and being a primary caregiver from a very young age that I started considering, I suppose, what you would call deep existential questions in my early 20s. Like, Han, you're going to die, babe. Your mum's dying. This is real. This isn't just the movies. Like, people die. And so I started to contemplate, like, what do I want to create? What do I want my life to be? What do I want my legacy to be? Who actually am I? And so when you're put in a situation where I think the stakes are high in the fact that you realize that you are mortal, right? And your mother is passing away. And that's, I was in and out of hospices, in and out of hospitals, in and out of all of these places in my early 20s, that I really started to think, if I let go of what everyone else thinks I should do, what would I do? If I let go of the prescribed normal path, what would my path be? right? And so it all kind of started from that. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of healing modalities. I completed my psychology degree, 4 years studying psychology at the University of Leeds, to be like, that wasn't helpful. So I did a lot more research, a lot more study, and eventually 10 years later, it is integrative healing. That's me in a nutshell.
No, I love it. And I think that this is an interesting thing. I think that we do, a lot of people struggle with different things, and I say most, and maybe it's not most, but most of the people I encounter, they don't really think of their struggle as a blessing. They don't really think of their struggle as the gift. They think of it as the struggle. And I think what you mentioned is everybody who has like an origin story, they all started in struggle. And it's so easy to overlook that and think, well, the struggle is the part that we're trying to avoid, rather than the struggle is actually the path to identifying who we are. The struggle is a necessary part of becoming the person we want to become. And discovering that and choosing that. You mentioned a few things with your mom getting diagnosed and you getting diagnosed with two completely different things. And then you ask yourself, who do I want to be? How do I want to be remembered? And then like, what's my purpose? What about your mom getting diagnosed with cancer and then kind of going through the final stages of life? What about specifically about that was driving that question? Like, man, I'm mortal. Because there's other people who say, oh, we're mortal, we're dying, we should all just die, right? And especially if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, what was the thing that kicked you into, you know what, I want my life to mean more than what it means today? Like what exactly happened around that time?
I think you hit the nail in the head, and there is more to it at the start of what you shared. So I have a belief system that in every obstacle, there is an opportunity. I don't even call it a struggle. It's just life. Sometimes life be lifing and people be peopling. And that's the most spiritual thing that we can learn, right? We think that personal development is perfecting our life, right? So no pain, no suffering. That's not actually true or realistic. Okay. So I think I always had this deeper feeling. And this is why it's important to be connected to yourself. So I always had this deeper feeling that everything was happening for a reason, and this is something that my family always said to me, everything happens for a reason. And so that conditioning was obviously beneficial for me at that time. But let me give you a greater context of my mother's illness and passing. My mum passed away at 56 years old. And we are conventionally taught that you go to school, go to uni. If you go to uni, have a job, 60, you retire, and then you start living. Okay. So there was something about my mum not making it to retirement. There was something about my mum, my whole life. My mum was someone who was, she struggled with depression, right? So for me, depression was something that was passed down my lineage, but she was also super passionate, and she had like eyes of wonder, and she loved living. It was interesting juxtaposition. And there were so many things that she didn't do, right? There was a book that was half complete. She would say, if I'd chosen differently, I would have been a marine biologist, or I would have studied rocks, or she would have studied anything and everything. And so when you see someone that has, I don't want to use the word, maybe it's potential, maybe it's inspiration, maybe it's motivation, maybe it's just life, right? Not get to the time period that we've classified as living. There's something about that makes you go, wait a minute, we've got it wrong. I could die tomorrow. So if I'm waiting to my 60s to live, then this isn't right. So it created a level of urgency in me, but not in urgency as in time's running out. Urgency as in the moment is now. Like, Hannah, you're alive now. The moment is now. Do the thing now. And so I think what stops people from living the life that's actually authentic to them is fear, right? And so what do we do when we're scared? I'll do it tomorrow, right? I'll do it next year. I'll do it when I've lost 20 kilos. I'll do it when, but for me, being so, I suppose, shocked by everything that played out, I went, well, today is the day, right? Today is the day. And so I think it was a lot of the context of my mother's passing that's led, but there's also, and I have to be honest here, is there was choice and there was decision. Okay. When I was diagnosed, and I can take you back to 2 precise moments, when I was diagnosed with mental health, my mum, when she was diagnosed with cancer, had antidepressants still. And there was something, and I was studying, psychology as an undergrad at uni, and I thought, this is crap. Sorry, that might offend people, but I thought it was I'm not going to say a waste of time because it was part of my journey, but right, all they do is teach you, these are the different pills. There is nothing on like, there is CBT. No, okay, I'm not even going to get into that tangent. But I made a decision. I was like, well, if medication worked, my mother would be healed. And it's been 30 years and she hasn't. So I remember calling my father, I would have been 19 years old, and I said, I'm going to do it differently. Okay. So I'd seen my life doing the conventional in my mother, and I chose a new way. Then when my mum passed away, there was a decision where I made, and this is going to sound mad to some, and the decision was, I choose to become the person who says this is the best thing that ever happened to me. We can either choose to be a victim of our life story, or we can choose to be, in our greatness because of our life story. And that's a decision.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for those listening, I say a lot of the same stuff that Hannah just said. So when I find people who think the same way I do, that's what is exciting to me, is finding out, well, why do they think the same way? Because part of this podcast is helping you, who maybe doesn't think the way that we do, discover what are the questions that led us to think the way we do. What are the experiences that led us to our thought processes? Because although we were worlds apart, it sounds like you grew up in Britain, England area. I grew up in Utah in America, and we came out with a very similar perspective on life because of different experiences, but how we process those emotions are the important thing. So it doesn't matter what your background is or where you came from, what country you live in. None of that matters. What matters is how are you going to choose to perceive your experiences? And as Hannah says, life happens for her, not to her. And sometimes people will give me pushback in that area and say, well, I don't think that I chose all these negative things to happen to me. So how is it happening for me? Right. And I don't think that it's not about, from a third party perspective, that everything is happening for you as a gift. Like somebody's gifting you the loss of your mom. Somebody's gifting you sexual abuse. Somebody's gifting you physical abuse. Somebody's gifting you a divorce. It's not like there's a third party God out there who's gifting you all these experiences as like, hey, here's a gift. Here's a gift. I don't believe that that's how it is. But I do believe that if I perceive everything as a gift, even if it was meant with ill intent, if my perception of it is that it's a gift, then my perception is that I'm going to learn from it and that there's something to gain. And it's an internal perception. So when we're saying life happens for me, not to me, that's not saying that somebody else is doing something for me. It's saying I'm going to choose to believe that there's a silver lining in every obstacle or in every part of life, and the positive and the negative. I was on a training call with my team the other day, and I was talking about Justin Bieber because I like one of his songs. I like a lot of his songs, honestly. But it was funny. It's like, well, I don't like him because of these few experiences. And I'm like, wow, if all you knew about me was all of my negative things, you probably wouldn't like me either, But did you consider how he was raised? Did you consider that all the things he's been through that maybe has led him to being who he is? Right? Have you given him grace in all those different areas? So I think that that's important. I want to jump back just a little bit, because all of this kind of, I feel like, bleeds into each other. 19 years old, there's a lot of life between 0 and 19 years old. Like a lot of things happen. You had a lot of experiences, probably good, bad, everything. I'm curious, what do you feel like led to your eating disorder? And like the mindset behind it, and then how did that manifest itself in your world? So what led to it, and how did it manifest it? And then, well, go to those two, and then I'll ask another question after.
No one asks this question. I love this question. I actually had to think there. Okay, so my mother I mean, a lot of you guys might not know about the history of Spain, but in Spain, there was a civil war that affected a lot of families. And one of those families was mine. Okay. My mother was brought up in Morocco as a refugee from the civil war in Spain. Okay. She was born there, but her bedtime stories were of, oh, your grandma got killed in a mass burial kind of thing. Okay. Now, here's the thing with trauma. And here's the thing with war. And here's the thing with trauma that's unprocessed. It's passed down family lines. So it's passed down on a physiological level. You can read things like, Gabor Mate's got an excellent book on this where he collates studies. You can see, for example, this is an amazing study. It was an amazing study about something very tragic, but it's very interesting if you're scientifically minded like me, right? They researched the mental well-being and neurochemistry of children whose mothers were pregnant watching September 11th. Okay. And what they found was the mothers that had bodies that were less able to deal with the trauma had children that actually had affected neurochemistry. Okay. So less love pathways, let's put this in simple language, less of a stress tolerance, more of an alert response. All of these things are the impact of trauma. So all of this to go to say, okay, you may think there was a civil war in Spain and Hannah's family was in it, is unrelated to my mental well-being. And you would be wrong, okay? Because that fear is held in the system. That fear affects the nervous system, it affects the neurochemistry, okay? And the children born from a person that doesn't deal with that or process that, God, I don't know how sciencey to get. This is another little fact.
I'm letting you go, and then I'm going to go way deeper, probably. And depending on how deep you go, I'm going to take it. Okay. Another level. I love this. This is like probably my favorite. I don't know if there's a favorite topic, but it's definitely a topic that I am passionate about and I geek out about. So we're going to have a fun conversation for sure. But go all the deep. Yeah, let's go. Let's deep dive.
Okay, there's smiling faces, guys. So there's something called attunement that happens between primary caregivers, right, and their children, but before the age of 2. And so through eye movements between the primary caregivers and the child is the nervous system and the neurobiology programmed. That's insane. So what do I mean by this? Let's say you've got a mother who loves you. My mother loved me. She loves me. I still believe she's here, but she loves me. There is never a question of lack of love in my family. That is not something that I have personally experienced from but my mother, because of her trauma, was disconnected to self, okay? In the fact that didn't know how to read her own hunger cues, low sensitivity to pain, all of these things that we don't realize are not good. Basically not in her body, living in her mind. So you have a child and you're not tapped into self, then you can't fully attune to the child. You don't meet the needs as the child needs it, right? The eye movements are programming in a heightened stress response. All of these ways is how trauma is physiologically passed down the lineage, okay? So I believe that my mother, she had her first mental breakdown at 19 years old. My mother, when she was pregnant with me, she was suicidal. She was put on antidepressants, okay? None of these things were good for my biology. And I don't say this as I'm so angry with my mom. Like, I just say this from a very rational, that affected my biology, I was an anxious child. I cried all the time. I wanted to be held all of the time. I couldn't be left alone. There's a biological reason for that. So I believe, my mother's lack of attunement and connection to self, and eating disorder. What is an eating disorder? It's a lack of connection to self as well, right? I feel pain. And I think through control, what I'm going to do is alleviate pain. It's a maladaptive response to emotional pain. Okay. So I believe that all of my mental health conditions were maladaptive responses to emotional pain because we don't teach human beings in school to deal with emotional pain or to deal with life or to deal with relationships or to deal with the fact that, maybe this boy fancied me and I didn't fancy him. And then he said something mean to me. Like we don't equip kids to deal with stuff that happens. Okay. So I think biologically there was something there. Now, there's also something called belief. What are beliefs? Thoughts that are repeated. That's all a belief is. Sure. And families pass on beliefs, and beliefs are either nourishing or they're damaging. Let's put them in those two very limited categories. There are nuance, there is gray area, but for today's conversation, okay? Now, when you come from a lineage of refugees, okay, my family didn't have a good take on life, okay? My grandma does not think life is a nice thing, okay? Which makes sense. She lost her mum, she lost her dad, she lost her brother, she lost her sister, she lost her daughter, okay? And in our world, we don't equip people to even deal with grief, let alone anything else. So what did my grandma believe about life? Life is bad, life is suffering. What did my mum believe about life? Life is bad, life is suffering. Unconsciously as humans, we create lives that match our belief systems until someone in the family says, what if that's not true? That was me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so important to say, what if it's not true? And accept that it possibly, like, my mind works, what's the worst thing that could happen? And accept that, okay, that's the worst, and then make it better. Like, now let's go and improve on it. I want to go back through this conversation that you just shared, because you shared it from a beautiful perspective of the post-trauma and like even after the children are born. But I think a lot of people still don't fully understand, well, how is it passed down? Okay, it's passed down through what you just mentioned or what you discussed a lot. I'm sure you know this other side of it as well, but a lot of it is a nurturing type aspect. Like, okay, if I'm detached from myself, then I'm being more detached from my child, not read cues. And then that's more of a nurturing aspect of how we transfer anxiety, transfer depression, transfer things. Our kids are learning by example. They're hearing the things we say. If we believe and we say because we believe it, then we frame our world and the words we use from a perspective of poor me or negative me, the world's out to get me, then our kids are going to adopt those things. But trauma, so there's like three elements here that are, I think, really important for people to understand. And it's not as nuanced as people think it is. The reason it brings a nuance into the conversation is because most people who come from a religious background, specifically a Judeo-Christian background, don't accept, they hear the word reincarnation or having lived multiple lives, and they hear that and they say, nope, that's not how it works. We were born, we're going back to Jesus, and we have one life and we have a spirit, and that's the life, right? And so when we bring this science into it, then they're like, well, how does that conflict with my religious belief system? And I think it's important to address it because there's a lot of people who they don't have that conversation often enough. And I'm with you that most psychology classes, at least at this point, is kind of a waste of a lot. We'll say that. But something that's really interesting, if you study the mind and how it's not just the mind. The mind is in and of itself. We'll get into that. But the actual DNA. So let's just talk about DNA for a second. And the process of how a child is born. So you have a sperm and an egg, and they carry DNA strands from male and female, and then they connect and they basically become one strand of DNA, a new strand of DNA, and then that starts replicating, and then this child starts growing. Well, how did that DNA get turned into an egg or a sperm? Well, it got replicated, copied, another word is copied, or you could say scanned and recreated from the original DNA of the parent, which is, so now this is like the mRNA process, where basically we are recreating this DNA strand. Well, the problem is that what is DNA? At its molecular level, all DNA is a nucleus with a proton and a neutron. It's an electrical frequency of motion. And so when, just like any electrical charge, like let's take your house, for instance, if there's a lightning strike and there's a surge of power, then it disrupts the electrical frequency. And if there's not a regulator, I forget the actual term, they have a term for it, transformer, I think is what it's called, at the power station that regulates that and reorganizes the power to run in sync, then it could really screw up a lot of things. Same thing in our bodies. Our bodies generally don't have that regulator. So when we have these big EMP strikes to our body, these traumatic experiences, it disrupts the electrical frequency of our DNA. Thus, when that DNA gets copied, it's like you scan something 7 times, and it's mixing words up, it's flipping letters around, it's screwing up the process. And so trauma that happened to somebody 4, 5, 6, 7 generations ago has continued to be copied into your DNA. So in large respect, you don't get to choose whether or not you have these very real biological, you can call it biological, chemical, whatever you want to call it, but it's part of who you are. Literally, your energy frequency was copied into trauma.
And what I think is really important to take this conversation so people can see that it's not a life sentence is that originally people were taught gene theory. Okay, what's gene theory? These are your genes, you're screwed if they're not good ones.
They thought it was a finite solution, but if it can get screwed up, it can get fixed at any point in time.
This is it. This is exciting. Okay. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that so many people have got so many negative things to say about the time of when we're alive, but we're alive at a point where we're realizing that we are really powerful, right? And we are realizing that things like gene theory that have been taught that are not helpful, because it's saying if you've got a bad gene, then you're screwed. We're learning about epigenetics, okay? And what does epigenetics say? Epigenetics says that gene expression depends on the environment of the gene, okay? So that means your genes will have a higher or lower frequency expression. Let's just call it that for simplicity.
Let me pause just really quick because I like this, but I want to get too far away from this. Gene theory is not necessarily the problem with a lot of these theories is they stop and they preach half the truth as the full truth, right? And that's a problem when we stop seeking for more information, because yes, you were transferred genes through generations to where you are. That aspect of gene theory is true. It's factual, right? Nobody can argue it at this point. But the question is, once you get those genes, what are you able to do with them? So the conclusion of, okay, this was genetically happened, the conclusion of that it's genetic is in gene theory that you're screwed. But the reality is, yes, it's genetic and it can change. And so I want to be clear that gene theory, along with any other theory, there's tons of theories out there that stopped trying to learn more about the theory. And that was the issue, is we stopped believing in progression and we believed that it was all settled, and it's not all settled. And there's a lot of progress to happen. And so I just wanted to clarify that gene theory is not necessarily wrong. The wrong part is the conclusion of what gene theory meant for you and me. So
good, because you can apply that to every other area of science. It's meant to be progressive. It's not that we believe this now, we believe this forever, and we get annoyed if someone adds a progression, right? If we could all open into that mindset, I think we'd be in a different planet, right? But anyway, let's talk about epigenetics. So what epigenetics states, and for those of you that want to read more studies, Bruce Lipton is probably the biggest guy, the biology of belief. But what does he show in the biology of belief? He shows that by changing the belief of someone, by changing the emotional frequency of someone, and I'm going to speak about emotions in a second so we can also see this in a different way, you change gene expression. That's insanity. If you change your beliefs, you can literally grow a new body, right? That's the work that I do with people in different ways.
So what's funny about that is, and people don't, so I did anyways, you can go read the research, and I'll say it's inconclusive, as in there's different opinions, but generally speaking, the oldest cell in your body is about 15 years old, and it's in your femur bone, generally speaking. Now, some people will say, oh no, there's older cells. Those are replicated cells, but which means that I'm going to use a simple example. If you're overweight and then fat cells reproduce frequently, like 3 months, if you continue to be overweight for more than 3 months, then that's because you did not, as you said, the belief didn't change about what you should look like or what you could look like. And because that belief didn't change, then it got replicated. It got just duplicated. If you change your belief, simply changing your belief about what you are and what you should look like could just cease the expression of fat cells. Anyways, it's insane. That's like a simple thing, but you can heal every part of your body that way by ceasing the expression by changing a belief and changing the expression to a muscle cell or something else, because they're all just cells and we get to choose how they're going to recreate themselves.
This is my favorite conversation. I'm so happy that this is happening. Just nerdy fact after nerdy fact. But it's so important and it's so exciting, right? Because if you hear from my story, so I'm 31 in 2 weeks, right? So I was diagnosed when I was 19. I look very young, guys, and I keep saying that I look young. So my biology...
Right. You look 18 forever and always.
Thank you, forever and always. But I am pretty much 31. So the first few years coming off medication, you know, all of this mental health, it was challenging because it was rewiring a new way of being. I haven't taken medication for 7, 8 years. And it's not something that I have to work hard at because this is now the new me. So when we're changing belief, when we're changing biology, when we're becoming a new us, okay, which we can talk about what that means, I think there's an understanding that the first phase, yes, can be challenging, but it gets to a point where this is so you can't even recognize or remember being the old way. Okay. So it can feel like a big feat, but at some stage it won't be.
Well, so to add to that, right, you can't remember being the old way. So I say this all the time. It's like who I was when I was a teenager did a lot of stupid things, but because I understand that every cell in my body is no longer in existence inside of my current form, it's been released into the universe and I have new cells, then I did not actually do anything that happened. Like who I am today didn't do that. The person back then did, but not only do you not remember it, but like, I don't even recognize that person. Why? Because I'm not that person. In every factual, scientific sense of the word, I am not the same person that did things when I was 10 years old. I still have memory of it because there's memories that get duplicated, but my body, no physical form of me, no cell did that then. So I am a new person. 100% new person. And it's insane. You can just like be a new person. You are a new person, whether you want to be or not, you are, because that's how the nature of cell replication works.
So you can use this to your advantage or you can stay the same. So a lot of people define themselves by their past.
Yep.
I am this because I did that. Right? I can't be successful in business because I tried for 2 years and I didn't get the results I want. And so they don't realize by defining themselves in the present by their past, they keep living their past. So there's something to be said for defining yourself every single day. And it's the step-by-step of that leads to the huge, huge jumps in evolution.
Well, and I think that this is, so if you guys want to hear more about this, then you're going to have to sign off of Facebook and listen on the rest of the podcast on either Apple, Google, all those other places. You can find the Fuel Your Legacy show. So we'll say goodbye to you on Facebook and we're going to continue the conversation here in a second. But the question I'm going to ask her next is about we're going to dive into the conversation of waiting till you're 65 to start living versus starting to live today. So if you want to hear that, you're going to have to be excited, anticipate the episode coming out, and then finish that part of the conversation on the podcast. So talk to you later. Perfect. Okay. So now let's dive into this. So your mom, you mentioned your mom didn't even start living. Well, she never made it to the point of start living because in society, we decided that you're going to work and then you're going to live at 65. That's when you're going to start living. What are you doing now to start living today?
God, what a great question. Okay. What am I doing to start living today? I think, and this is going to be a weird way to answer this question, a big contemplation of mine when mum passed is, I imagine myself, because I know that what we imagine and what we believe creates. So I imagine myself in my 90s, potentially hundreds, still very healthy, bounding around life, right? And I'm laying down my body because I believe that, and I know this is going to sound out there for some people, but for some people, they're going to love it. I believe that part of my process and my spiritual journey is when I do leave, it will be a peaceful, ready to go, laying my body down, kind of like Bob Proctor did, right? Louise Hay did. And I think about the last thoughts I would think about in this body, right? I would think about what for me would be like, that was it. Like, I nailed being Hannah, you know? I lived Hannah to the full. I believe in reincarnation, okay? So I don't believe that it's going to be my last rodeo. I believe that it's going to be my last Hannah rodeo, right? And so it's like, I've been given Hannah, I've been given this body. I'm this tiny little Spanish woman, right? What's the best version of this tiny little Spanish woman life? And so how I live my day to day is from that contemplation. And so I think to myself, you know, is this going to be a big deal when I pass away? No? Okay. Gone, right? What am I going to care about? And so I'm very clear in my life about what's important to me. So for example, my relationship with my partner, nourishing that, it's a really important thing. We've got a commitment to each other to not just be in a relationship, but to discover, as I believe that everything has more layers of good. Okay. So love isn't just love. There's always more layers of love. And I choose to be the person that's always in the exploration of feeling more layers of love. So if I look back on my relationship, right, I want to be the embodiment of that. I don't just want to be a theory. I want to be exploring that, getting that right, getting that wrong. So that feeds into how I prioritize my relationship, right? Same with my health, you know, I know that I want to get to 95 or 102, you know, whatever God gives me. And I don't want to be full of disease, you know. My dad's 75, he runs 10K a day. I've got evidence around my life. There's all of these people. Yeah, I know. And he builds greenhouses. Everyone thinks he's like 50, but it's very interesting, the contrast that I got with my parents, right? And I see that and I'm like, you know, my partner got to 40 in March this year and he's like, he's now training for an ultra marathon. So we're both big believers in potential, right? So today and now I work with a naturopath, okay? Because it's not just about having good enough health or not ill, but about having optimal health. So my decisions today are always influenced in my business, right? Am I willing to go the extra mile in my business now because I know that I'm creating legacy and purpose? Of course I am. Because I think about, and I imagine me, okay, I don't know if you do this, but like little old Hannah, like I've got big hair, a lot of big gray hair. I'm even teeny tinier. All Spanish grandmas are like pocket sized, okay, of which I will be one, right? So I visualize this. It's a very visual thing for me because that's how we create. And so I really try to inform my present, and this is, I suppose, the interesting thing, with decisions from my most desirable future, right? Not from my past.
And I love that, because that's what I'm glad I asked the question the way I did, and I'm glad you answered the way you did. Because here's the thing. So many people, they feel like it's a duality of speaking. When we say, hey, you've got to be visualizing your future. You've got to be having goals. You've got to be setting these intentions and all that. And they say, well, yeah, you're telling me to live in the future then, and you're going to do all these, you're going to start living in the future. And it's not that. Yes, you need all of those things. You need that to visualize it, but that's because where the mind goes, the body follows. And so you have to have those visions of the future and the goals and the things that you're going to do. Just like you're saying, I'm going to be a 90-year-old, 95-year-old grandma, Spanish little grandma, right? That's you saying, hey, that's going to happen in the future. But what's key about that is not that that's going to happen in the future, so I'm going to wait for that to happen in the future. But you're saying, okay, let's pretend I am that person today. How would I hope to be living this life today? What's going to produce the most fulfillment, fond memories, joy, and happiness when I am 90 because of what I did today? And that's really where all of vision strategy, I mean, you mentioned Bob Proctor, Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie, like all these people, what they're doing when they're talking about visualizing and the secret and working with a desire and intention and vision boards. What the purpose of those is to bring the future right up to reality and then have that future the way you want the future to be, inform, as you said, what you're doing today. how must you act today so that that is your future? I was talking to somebody last night, and one of his dreams is to help families and family entrepreneurs live their legacy, which is also one of my dreams. And he was saying, look, you have to stop saying, well, once I have X, then I will live this, right? You're not saying, well, once I'm a 90-year-old grandma, then I'm going to be happy about no, it's like, if I want what I want as a 90-year-old grandma, I've got to make that happen today. If I want the health that I want, I've got to make healthy choices today. If I want the mental health that I want, I've got to make mental health choices today. If I want the financial life that I want, I have to make the financial decisions today that are going to provide that life in the future. And by every act of me doing today what I can do, that is what's going to create that life. And there's another saying that people underestimate what they can accomplish in a year, and they overestimate what they can accomplish in a month. And I think the point of that phrase is that it's a small, consistent actions that people forget the law of compounding, and they don't know how to properly factor the law of compounding into their future. So they think, well, I'm going to do this a massive thing today. And the truth is, big, like Rome wasn't built in a day is the phrase. Those big accomplishments, they were never, I shouldn't say never. Generally, those big accomplishments are not results of grand acts. Generally, those big accomplishments that look monumentous right now are the compounding of simple actions every day. So you never actually do put in this big act ever. It's just a simple act. But people are like, I have to do this big act to catch up. And they don't realize that the way to catch up is to start being consistent with the small things in life.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting. So we hit a big milestone. We built the business to $1 million in about just over 2.5 years. Okay. Everyone wants to ask how, right? How did you do it?
Yeah.
Tiny things every single day consistently, right? Like teeny weeny tweaks.
Exactly.
And people hate that answer. They're like, can I not have a roadmap with one step? You know?
Yeah.
But it's the truth, isn't it? I just want to give an example of how we can keep our future in mind and make moves today. Because, and this to come back to my mum's story, when mum passed away, I made many choices. Okay. One of the choices was the business, the legacy. But a big thing for me was also, I want to have a family and I don't want to be working all the hours. So I'm exhausted, falling asleep on the couch and, all of these things. Now, because I knew that I wanted that, I started taking action in the present moment. What did that look like? Not dating men that didn't know how to commit. Do you know what I mean? It can be really simple things like, being really clear on what I'm going to tolerate in the relationship and what I'm not. Being clear about who is the person that I can build this life with, right? Hence Craig, my partner. That wasn't an accident. He didn't fall from the sky, right? Well, he kind of did. I did just walk past him in a coffee shop, but I'd very much intentionally decided. I knew what I was creating. I knew what I wanted. With the business, I always say to people, I'm on a 5-year plan. I'm about 3 years into a 5-year plan where the way I'm building the business isn't just building a business for money. There's intentionality behind it. I'm building up a team. I'm automating. I'm creating a body of work because when I go into the mummy phase of my life, I don't want to be as plugged in as I am now. Right. So those are things where I'm aware of the life that I want to live and they inform my present moment. And just like you say, they're tiny things, right? Instead of just chasing a goal this month, I'm thinking to myself, what's the infrastructure that we need that's going to last? And I think this is what entrepreneurs sometimes lack. They get stuck in dopamine hits of, I need this now, right? And they don't focus on what am I actually creating long term?
Yep. They need to read more, in my opinion. Start reading more Eastern, like Asian type, even Russia I would include in that. You start reading their philosophers and reading about the dynasty families and kind of the history. Most of their efforts, I'll call them that. A lot of these dynasties, they were 600 years long. They were 7, 8, 9, 10 emperors long. And it was clear to each person who was picking up in that process that they were fighting, they were trying to establish something for centuries, and that it was the role of the person in the middle of that century not to screw it up and to let that continue to go on. Well, you may not feel like anybody in your family, like there is a dynasty to even continue, but that doesn't mean you can't start one. And to start one, the first person who started it, they didn't start it and think, well, I'm going to do my best and hopefully the next guy does it. They started saying, look, we will be in charge. We will be the rulers for the end of time. For the next 1,000, 2,000 years, our family's going to be in charge. And if we want to create that type of power structure, then we have to create habits. We have to create belief systems. We have to create an identity, not just in ourselves, but in the people who view our family, that we will be held up on this pedestal. I mean, you see this with the royal family as well in England, where they're trying to do that. And pretty much all European families, they have the royal families. And a lot of them, they're all the same family. Like if you look at like the actual genealogical trees, they're pretty much all related. And they were able to stay in power because of those experiences. And they were able to pass those things down, not on a short time frame, but they were thinking multi-century long plans. And it's the same thing with you're saying, even a 5-year plan. Some people look at a 5-year plan like, that's a really long plan. Why are you planning 5 years from now? It's like, dude, my mentors, they're planning 300 years from now. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, they're setting up their trusts. They're setting up their life to perpetuate itself for the next 300, 400 years. They're writing laws and instructions about how their family is going to operate for hundreds of years from now. They're thinking about hundreds of years, not 5 years. 5 years is like, are you going to even start? Are you sure you're not thinking big enough yet? And so I think that that's something to think about when we're talking about legacy and how we can live in the present, but also keep our future close to our heart. We got to be thinking much, much more long-term. And you are as well. Like you're thinking, okay, this is a first phase, 5 years to get my business set up so that I can exit or at least step out a little bit more so that I can enter the next phase of my legacy, which is having a child and then passing what I've built onto them and instilling those beliefs and things into the next generation. So there's multiple phases to a plan, but I think that the farther out we can envision our future and what could look like, the better off we'd be as a society if everybody was doing that.
I love this. I mean, like I feel expanded by that because I've never thought honestly about that far zoomed out, but it gives a whole greater context to what we're doing. And, I work with entrepreneurs and I work with people that have businesses. And I think the biggest obstacle is people like, I'm not where I want to be yet. Right? That person on social media has got to where I want to be quicker. Why am I not there yet? And I think these type of thoughts is really what sabotages entrepreneurs most, right? I don't like my present moment, But when you zoom out and you give a greater context, right? What happens is you relax and you're like, there's time. So it's like urgency, but not frustration that it's not here yet. Urgency is in living in the present, right? But not needing $1 million yesterday when you began your business 3 weeks ago, right? I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm just saying that, and I think it's really interesting, this whole concept of time, because it's like you're holding many planes. You're in your present moment. You're aware of the future. You're able to zoom out. You're letting go of the past. But I do think that this is part of the mastery that is important in someone that does want to create a legacy or someone that does want to have an extraordinary life or a life that's out of the normal.
Right. And what we talked about in the beginning of this episode is how those genetics pass down and how that duplicates. You actually, by structuring your energies properly and healing your energies and getting those back into a perfect unison of electronic frequency, getting that back into unison, you actually are going to be part of, like, your energy is a copy of your DNA, the one that you healed and created will continue to live through those hundreds of years of things. So you're going to be there for that whole process too. So like, you want it to be good. You want those, as you continue to be passed down to the next generation, and you're instilling your DNA into those next generations, you want to have created that beautiful existence for them. And so just as much as we're doing things in the physical, we'll call it the physical realm of acquiring potentially assets or locations or whatever that we're going to pass down. Another part is structuring that energy and breathing that energy into the next generations of excellence. And it's not that one person is more excellent than the other, or one group of people is more excellent than the other. I mean, maybe that's factually true at this point, but it's not like there's a limit to who can become excellent. Anybody can become excellent as soon as they choose to become excellent. And you might have the benefit of somebody choosing before you and breeding excellence into you, but you can still screw it up if you aren't careful and make sure it stays on the right path. So it's like, you're not guaranteed excellence, but excellence can be given to you, and then you could screw it up, or you can continue to propagate that and improve on that excellence throughout the next generations.
I think if we come to this whole concept of what is genius, you used the word excellence, right? What is genius? So what's a lie that we've been taught? Genius is given to a tiny population of people on planet Earth. It's not what I believe. I believe genius exists in everyone within the right environment. What's the right environment? Okay. Correct beliefs, doing the emotional work, right connection to soul, making sure that you're looking after energetic hygiene, right? Who I am today after the work that I've done is completely different, like we talked about, to who I was when I was younger, okay? Because I've given the right environment for my genius to thrive. So I believe in consciousness, we are all equal. In circumstance, we are not. In family, we are not. In where we're born, we are not. But in consciousness, we are all equal, right? And so it comes back to this point of choice. Do I choose to be someone that experiences all of me and all of my potential, right? Or do I choose my circumstances to be bigger than my potential? I believe in choosing your potential, right? And I believe in creating the right spaces for your potential to thrive. But again, that's a choice.
I love it. So we have to end because I have another meeting to hop on. But what if somebody wanted to get in touch with you or learn more through your mentoring or coaching? How would they get in contact with you before we wrap this up?
So we have created a special link for everyone listening on this podcast. It is the school of integrativehealing.com/legacy. I'll send it to you afterwards, so I'm sure it'll be on the show notes. But it's just to repeat, the school of integrativehealing.com/legacy. Okay, and on this page, you'll see that there's 3 options. So you can either, for my people that are just like, I'm a big believer in that when you meet someone that you want to work with, I'm a big believer in becoming the person that just does it, right? So if you are one of those people, welcome, love you already. You can just book in a call with my team, right? We have so many different products. We have so many different offerings. I'm not going to list them out now. It's just better that we do everything bespoke. So you just share where you're at and we'll recommend your next steps. Okay. If you want to get more of a feeling of the way that I do business, we are giving you a free course. It's called Multi-Dimensional Business. It's this combination of, I suppose, the different dimensions of business. So the emotional, mental, spiritual, and actual practical work that business entails. Or you can just join my Facebook community where you'll see about all the things that we're doing, all the offers that we've got going, all the free events that are happening. But you can see that all on the link. This has been so much fun. I hope that something within you has been sparked about, oh my God, if everything is possible, what do I actually want? That's the question I want to leave you guys with. If everything is possible, what do I want?
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much, Hannah, for coming on, taking the time, making sure that we were able to make this happen. And please just go reach out to her, follow her on, she does other podcasts as well. So you can go listen to different conversations, probably hear a different perspective, and just go learn more about her and her practice and see if it's something that will benefit you if you're open to that. It'll benefit you if you're open, but you may not be open yet. That's okay. But if you are open, I would go and learn more about that. And thank you so much. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.